let's get to the reason we're all here tonight. Tony Ulwick. I've known Tony for a long time. I think we first met in person at that product camp at Yahoo years ago. You were speaking at that product camp at Yahoo, and you were kind of one of my heroes because I had read your book and I loved it. So that was cool. And then, as I said, this is his third time speaking here. It's always a very popular topic. Everybody loves hearing what he has to say. He's a founder and CEO of Strategyn, which is a company that applies the concepts and helps companies, have more successful products. Before that, he worked at IBM. I know he worked on the PC Junior as part of his origin story. It's very cool. It's like a Marvel superhero. He's basically one of the pioneers of jobs to be done. There are a lot of people these days that like claim to have been involved or whatever. He's like the OG jobs to be done person, which is why it's always great to hear his thoughts on it. And he's the author of What Customers Want and his newest book, Jobs to be Done. His Twitter handle is @Ulwick. So be sure to tweet if there's something you enjoy. And he's going to be sharing advice on how to achieve product success with jobs to be done. So with that, Tony, please take it away.
So what we're going to talk about tonight is jobs to be done theory and outcome-driven innovation and how it can be applied to achieve product success. All of us are fond of innovation, to say the least. Many of you stake your careers on it. It's a top priority in nearly every company. And what I find so interesting about it is, despite the fact that there's so much emphasis placed on innovation, in most companies, it's still viewed as a rather unpredictable process. As Dan mentioned, I started my career at IBM. I worked on a product called the PC Junior, which was supposed to be IBM's entree into the home computer market. We were going to beat Apple. It's going to be great, take over the world. The day after we introduced the product, the headline in the Wall Street Journal read, "The PC Junior is a flop," and it was. It really took us by surprise. And I wondered personally, how did they know so quickly? We just released the product yesterday, and today they're calling it a flop. And I thought, wow, there must be a better way to innovate, especially with a company like IBM with all the vast resources that it has. So with that, I started a career in innovation management back before really there was much focus on this. I spent my last 5 years in IBM from like 1985 till 1991, thinking about better ways to innovate. And I'll tell the story about what we discovered along the way and where we're at today. I want to start this by describing how I think about innovation. I view innovation as a process. And at a very high level, it sounds like a pretty simple process. We're just trying to come up with solutions that address unmet customer needs. Now, there's only two inputs here, solutions and customer needs, right? And I lay this out along a stage gate type process because what I want to focus on is what I call the innovation process, right? The upfront set of steps that result in a product concept, everything that happens before product development, right? So that's what we're viewing as the innovation process. Now, the ultimate goal of that process is this. It's to conceptualize a product that you know with a high level of certainty is going to win in the market before it goes into development, right? So that's a bit different, right? Just like in the IBM case, it would have been nice to know 2 years in advance of it being launched, or even before it started being developed, that the thing we're working on is going to win in the marketplace. That's what we all want to know as product developers. We want to be confident that we're doing the right thing. It's the right product and we're building it right. Now, the funny thing is, in most situations, companies never even attempt to achieve that goal. The goal isn't to devise a product concept that you know is going to win in the market before development begins. It usually looks more like this. There's typically an ideas first type of approach where there's some limited understanding of customer needs and there's some concept that was developed. And that concept gets prototyped and tested and refined over a number of iterations. What generally happens, it intertwines the innovation process with the development process. So we're actually developing the product and learning from those iterations as we're going through the process. Well, of course, that's a very inefficient way to learn about customers' needs, right? We're learning about them as we go and filling in the gaps as we discover them. Well, obviously, there's a better approach, right? The other way is to flip it around and say, well, let's uncover all the customer's needs up front, figure out which needs are unmet, see if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, pick the needs that we want to go target, and then create solutions that will address them. Well, that makes perfect sense, but it seems to be harder to do in practice. So I wanted to talk about why is it so hard to execute this process in this fashion? Because what we see is the needs-first approach to innovation done traditionally really doesn't have much better success rates than the ideas-first approach to innovation. So what's missing? So the first step I want to get into is, why does this fail? I want to use this story to introduce this concept. You've all heard this quote, right? If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, what intrigues me is the way people interpret this statement. What I often hear is people walk away thinking that customers don't know what they want, or that customers can't articulate their needs, or that customers have latent needs that they don't even know they have. Now, I'm sure as product developers, you've heard all of this, right, before, and I hear this every single day in conversations. Years later, Steve Jobs came along and said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them, which again makes it sound like these statements are correct, that customers don't know what they want, can't articulate their needs, have latent needs. What I want to do here, I wanted to launch a poll. Dan, if you wanted to do the first poll. Do you believe that customers have latent needs that they don't know they even have? So yes or no? Do you believe customers have latent needs they don't know they have? Again, a good response.
Yes.
Great.
It's pretty stable here. All right, here we go. I'm going to share the results.
So you can see that 79% say yes, people have latent needs that they don't even know they have. So let me talk about that briefly. Now, if you believe that, that could be a bit problematic, right? If you believe that customers don't know what they want, that they can't articulate their needs, that they have latent needs they don't know they even have, then why would you ever go to customers and ask them about their needs, right? They're going to be incomplete. They don't know what they want. So if people can't articulate their needs, why take a needs-first approach to innovation? And a lot of companies use this as justification, going down the ideas-first path, right? And I've seen it over and over again. But here's the thing. Henry Ford and Steve Jobs never said customers don't know their needs or have latent needs. What they're saying is, if I asked people what solutions they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Or people don't know what solutions they want until you show it to them, right? Now, that is very different because customers don't know what solutions they want. They can't articulate the best solutions. And why should they? They're not the engineers or the scientists or the materials experts, right? They're customers trying to get a job done, right? So the key point here is a solution is not a need. A solution satisfies a need. And I think we all know that, but these myths tie us up. And so we end up sticking with this ideas first mindset that's very hard to break out of and to conceptualize needs as something different than solutions. So asking people what solutions they want, I think we can conclude is a failed approach to innovation, right? So let's ask customers about their needs instead, which brings us to the next question, which is, what the heck's a need, right? Exactly what is a customer need? I've studied this for years, and I find it remarkable that despite all the talk about customer needs inside companies, despite all the time that's spent trying to understand those needs and all the money that's spent on needs discovery, there's a dirty little secret of innovation, which is there is no agreement on what a need even is. We interviewed 15 different customer need gathering experts and asked them to define for us, what is a customer need? And we got 15 different definitions. And think about this in your organization. You have the sales team talking about wants and features and solutions. You have marketing talking about needs as exciters and delighters. You get development talking about them as pains and gains. R&D is talking about requirements and specifications. Everyone has a different view of what a need is and the different purpose for using these inputs that come from customers in their workflows. So if we can't agree on what a customer need is, then how can we agree on what the needs are, which are unmet? If there's segments of people with different unmet needs, what's the best solutions, and so on. So let's fire up the second poll. Is there agreement on your product team as to what a need is? And again, we're not asking if they know what all the customers' needs are. We're just asking, is there agreement on what a customer need actually is? And the results I see coming in are very consistent with what we've been polling for years on this very same question. So I find this remarkable that it's still such an issue.
And then I'll share it. So we got 85-15 split. 85 no.
So it's 85% of you saying that there isn't agreement on the product teams that you're on as to what a need is. Yet, of course, everyone's motivated to come up with solutions that satisfy unmet customer needs. So this is a problem we've sought out to solve, right? The problem with innovation isn't that customers don't know their needs, right? It's not that customers don't know their needs. The problem is that companies can't agree on what a need is. So the implications, of course, multiple. The customer's needs and the priority go unknown. The process itself becomes guesswork as people are forced to take that ideas first approach to innovation. And if you're innovating one outcome at a time or one need at a time, you end up creating incremental products, Me Too products, and often fail, much like we did with the PC Junior. So clearly, we need a little work in this space, and this is what we've been doing for years, is to figure out, well, how should a need be defined? A need statement is a set of words that have to instruct the organization on how to create value for the customer. That's what we're looking for. That's the purpose of a need statement from a product development standpoint, right? We want some insight. We want instruction. Tell us how to create value for you, right? Whether you're marketing or development, R&D, that's the question you're asking. And these need statements are words, right? They're sentences that have to tell a story or deliver some pieces of information that are going to be valuable to you as developers. So upon looking at this, we can go through and ask the question, well, what are the characteristics of the perfect need statement? Like if I want to invent a statement that's trying to convey information, what characteristics should it have? Well, first off, it should be useful across all key disciplines: sales, marketing, development, R&D. The organization has to have one understanding of what a customer need is, not different understandings in each silo, right? Second, they can't be latent needs and needs that people don't know they have. That defeats the whole purpose, right? They have to be needs that are knowable. People know about them. They're discoverable. People can articulate them. There's no such thing as a latent need. If there is, we're never going to make innovation a predictable process. A need is not a solution. So these statements have to be solution independent, right? We're defining a need in problem space, if you will, not solution space. Needs ideally would be stable over time. I'll get to this in a minute on how this is even possible, but this was the hard lesson I learned at IBM. You know, we went out and talked to customers, asked them what their needs were. We built a product that supposedly addressed those needs. And when we introduced it, they didn't want the product. Why? Well, their needs changed. Well, if needs are changing over time, then you're always going to be trying to hit a moving target, which really adds a lot of unpredictability to the innovation process. So somehow we have to make these statements stable over time. They also have to be actionable, meaning measurable, controllable, predictive of success. They have to be unambiguous, so they're consistent for prioritization by customers so they can tell us which needs are unmet. They have to be valid across all geographies so we don't have different needs in different parts of the world, per se. And we work in a lot of global companies. This becomes extremely important. And last, like I learned at IBM, if there's going to be some metrics people are using to judge the value of a product, I want to know them in advance of development, not the day after they're launched, right? So with this in mind then, how do we uncover a set of statements that meets this criteria? So we have to invent a statement that meets all this criteria. And the way to do this is to change the unit of analysis. You've all heard this statement before. You know, people don't want the quarter-inch drill. They want the quarter-inch hole, right? What we're doing here is is instead of focusing on the drill or on the product, let's focus on what the customer is trying to accomplish. Because what they're trying to accomplish is a process that can be broken down and studied. And there's metrics attached to what they're trying to accomplish. So we can figure out how people measure success along each step of the way. And this is why we say we want to focus on the customer's job to be done. When we think about it, this is the basis for jobs to be done theory. What we're doing is we're putting a new lens on innovation. Instead of seeing the world through the eyes of the company and the drill maker, we want to look at the world through the lens of what the customer is trying to achieve, or the hole maker, right? And this is a choice, right? Most companies see the world through the lens of what they create. The drill maker is in the drill market. They compete with other drill makers. The hole maker, of course, is looking for any solution that's going to create a quarter-inch hole, whether it's a drill or not. They don't care if it's a drill. They're just trying to get a job done. So when we think about it like this, we talk about jobs theory, and the basic premise is people buy products and services to get a job done, right? So that could be accomplishing a task, achieving a goal or objective, resolving, avoiding problems. It's really anything that a group of people are trying to accomplish. And the thought goes, if you can get a deep understanding of the customer's job to be done, innovation can become far more predictable and far more profitable. So that opens the door to a new way to think about customer insights. So then the next question arises, well, how can we obtain a deep understanding of the customer's job to be done? Well, over the years, we've laid out this hierarchy where we look at the high-level customer job to be done, and that job can be broken down into job steps. And then underneath each step, we can have the customer's needs or outcomes, as I'll define them here in a second. But if you're grounded in business process improvement, or I come from a manufacturing background, and as a manufacturing engineer, the whole goal is to figure out, what do you measure and control to produce a predictable output in a process? Well, we're applying the same exact thinking here, but what do you measure and control is being defined by the customer. How do they measure success when getting the job done? And as we're going to show here, customers have many metrics that they use to measure success as they go about and get a job done. I want to start with creating the job map, those steps along the top of the hierarchy. A job map is not a process map. It's not a customer journey map. It's not a customer experience map. It doesn't describe what people are doing. It describes what they're trying to do. Now, I know that sounds like a little nuance, but it makes all the difference in the world, because what we're trying to lay out here, there may be 50 different ways to get the job done, but we don't want to know the ways that they're getting that. We just want to know what people are trying to achieve as they go about get the job done, independent of the product that they're using, right? So we want to start with the job map. And we produced an article for HBR back in 2008. So this is nothing new, but it lays out this concept of the job map. It details step by step what they're trying to get done, right? A job map is solution independent. It details this ideal process flow. It applies across geographies. It applies to anyone who's getting the job done, regardless of the product that they're using. And this gives us our first set of insights into how to get the job done better. When we think about our goal as innovators, our goal is to help people get a job done better. So that could mean get more of the job done, get more of a step of a job done, get the entire job done. Because eventually someone's going to come along, and that happens in nearly every industry, with a single product that gets the entire job done on a single platform. They own the market, obviously, at that point. So you want to be the company that owns that platform that gets the entire job done, which means you have to know what that entire job is so that you can conceptualize the future. The other beauty of this also is that the customer's job to be done is stable over time. So it's not a moving target. The next step here is to understand the needs associated with getting the job done. So we're going to go down a level and talk about these outcomes. What I like about this is, again, it appeals to my engineering background, but to get a job done better, it's just like getting a process done better. There's only three ways to do that. You can get it done faster. You can get it done more predictably, so there's no variation from instance to instance. And you can get it done with a better result. So it's always delivering 100% result, right? So what you're trying to do is to remove everything from the job that's causing it to be slow, unpredictable, and delivering a poor result. And that's what these statements are all about. Now, the way we go about and get them is we talk to customers and ask them to take us on a very slow motion journey through what they're trying to achieve as they attempt to get a job done. The example we're showing here, remove an anatomical structure surgically. So these statements come from surgeons who are trying to get that job done. You can see those job steps: establish initial access, gain visual access to the structure, define the pathway to the target structure, navigate through the barriers to the structure, terminate the blood supply. Now notice as we're going through this, we're not saying how we're doing anything. Right? There's no mention of tools or products or what they're doing. It's all, what are they trying to do? I'm trying to terminate the blood supply. Then I'm trying to mobilize the structure from unexpected attachments. Then I'm trying to detach those attachments from the structure. Then I want to remove the structure. Again, we're not saying how we do anything. And if you look a layer lower, this is where we talk about the customer's needs. Step by step, as they're going through this, how are they measuring success along each step of the way? What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to avoid? Like number 8, minimize the time it takes to mobilize structures bound by adhesions that block access to the targeted structure. That's what they're trying to achieve in that step of the job. Number 9, what they're trying to avoid is minimize the likelihood of damaging structures when separating them from adhesions. That brings variability into the process and causes a bad result. And all these statements are generated with that mindset, right? How do we get the job done faster, more predictably, higher output, throughput, right? And what we generally find is that in any job, there's anywhere from 75 to 150 of these statements. And this is just a subset of this entire job, by the way. It's even a bit more complicated, but I think gives you the feeling for what we're looking for here. When companies try to understand needs, they really attempt to understand all the needs associated with getting a job done. What companies often do is they'll stumble across 1 or 2 unmet needs, or they'll assume they're unmet, and they'll create some product features that address those 1 or 2 unmet needs. And they'll do that frequently. So every product iteration is getting the job done just a little bit better. So what that forces a company to do is gets them in this routine of incremental improvement, where the product is never really getting so much better that it's beating the competition by a wide amount. Well, the reality is there may be 20 unmet needs in this market. We just don't know which ones they are, at least not yet. I'll show you how to get there in a minute. But we want to know all the needs so we can figure out which ones are unmet, and we can make a big dent in our next product iteration. Like if I knew what the top 20 unmet needs were, and we created a set of features that address all those needs in our next product iteration and got the job done 20, 30% better or more, that would be a breakthrough product, right? So these insights are going to go a long way in informing what we want to focus on in order to get the job done better. These outcome statements have very specific structure, format, syntax, and this is on purpose, right? We've learned over the years that in order for these statements to be knowable, discoverable, informative across all disciplines, solution independent, measurable, controllable, unambiguous, stable over time, that they have to be stated in this format. And these outcome statements structured in this format have all these characteristics that belong to the perfect needs statement, right? So you can see direction of improvement, metric that can be measured and controlled in the design of the product. So this gives you a direction of what you're trying to achieve. Minimize the time it takes to move an adjacent structure out of the visual field. You can actually brainstorm solutions around that metric and test solutions for their ability to minimize the time it takes. I can move it from taking 5 minutes down to 1 minute. It's measurable, it's controllable, it's actionable. Same with this structure here. Minimize the likelihood of damaging blood vessels along the pathway to the structure. This is something they're trying to avoid, right? Same type of format. And this is a format that we follow. We've done a lot of experimentation with this over the years. Did over 40 projects with Microsoft back in the early 2000s, where we tested many variations of these statements and surveys to see what kind of discrimination we get from customers when we put them in front of them in a survey format. And we found that offering many variations of these statements actually introduces variability into the innovation process, which of course is something we want to avoid. So narrowing it down to these types of statements in this structure and format is something that's very useful. These inputs can be used by sales to better position a sale for a company, by marketing, by development, and R&D. And these statements, because they're stable over time, inform your company's value creation efforts for years to come. And the reason, again, I'll show you, look at these statements here. They were valid 20 years ago. They're still valid today. They'll be valid 20 years from now, as long as people, surgeons, are trying to remove an anatomical structure surgically, right? And that's the beauty of laying it out in this fashion. So once you've done your qualitative work, you don't have to go back and do it every time you want to add a product feature. You're going to have all these inputs prioritized, as I'll show you here in a second. And this will lay out your most efficient path to growth. So how do we discover which of these needs are unmet? So now we have a list of 100 plus needs. Let's go back to some of the basics here. We know that people buy products to help them get a job done better and or more cheaply. So that means there's two types of opportunities that we can look for here. One is to get a job done better, we can identify and address the outcomes that are underserved, meaning they're important, but not well satisfied, right? The other side of the equation is to get the job done more cheaply, we can focus on needs, outcomes that are overserved. So these are unimportant outcomes that people are spending money on to satisfy, right? Or that companies are spending money on to satisfy, when in fact, customers don't need them to be that well satisfied. So this opens the door to quantifying these opportunities. And we do this through surveys. We can research anywhere from 90, we've done less, to 1,000, and we've done up to 14,000 surveys. Or people taking these surveys, and they tell us how important each outcome is. Like, how important is it to you that you're able to minimize the time it takes to move an adjacent structure out of the field? And how satisfied are you with your ability to do that, given the solutions that you use today? And we can ask them what solutions they use today as well. What that allows us to do then is to plot this on this graphic. We call this the opportunity landscape, where we have the important unsatisfied outcomes over here and the overserved outcomes on the other side of the equation, right? Now, this comes in awfully handy when you're trying to find out the most efficient path to growth, right? Because you're trying to get the job done better and more cheaply. And everything that over here on the right, you can focus on these 10 or 15 outcomes to get the job done better. And you can apply some cost reduction, especially in the hardware area, hardware products, to get the job done more cheaply. The beauty of this, of course, is all this is knowable before you even have an idea, right? What we're trying to do here is get so deep into the problem and understand exactly where customers are struggling to get the job done along all those different dimensions before we come up with a solution that addresses them. But just think of it, right? Like, what are the chances that you're randomly going to come up with a solution that addresses the top 10 unmet needs in the market if you don't know what the top 10 unmet needs are? Near zero, right? So this is certainly stacking the odds in your favor by approaching it from this manner. And what this allows you to do is to track this over time. You can measure your customers' progress over time in terms of how well they're getting the job done. If you look on the left there, this is the current level of satisfaction for your current solution, potentially, and you can have this in priority order of the most unmet needs. And so you focus on those top unmet needs. In the next iteration, you gain levels of satisfaction on those unmet needs. And now some other set of unmet needs, or some other set of needs, I should say, become the most unmet needs. And you do this iteration after iteration over time until you eventually get the job done perfectly. So think about it like that. What you're doing here is you're creating a set of metrics that you can use over the long term to judge your value creation efforts. And the model doesn't change. Like I said, the job is stable over time. The metrics are stable over time. So you can continually measure your progress in getting a job done better over that period of time. Another thing we discovered too is that products really do a much better job of being adopted if they get the job done significantly better. What we've also noticed is that most products get the job done just a little bit better. But you can ask yourself this question: would you switch from your favorite brand for a product that promises to get the job done 1% better or 2% better? Probably not, right? But what if it got the job done 10% better or 15% better or 50% better? At some point, you're going to break, right? And you're going to say, yeah, I'm only loyal to the brand, to a certain degree. If someone else comes up with a solution that gets the job done that much better, that's why I'm buying a product to begin with. So I'm going to go with that product that gets the job done best. We find that threshold to be somewhere around 15%. That's been our observation over the years. It's different a little bit in different industries, but it's about that number. So what that means is we can't just pick one outcome and satisfy it better and think we have a hit product. We need to look at the top 10 unmet needs and address all of them in an effective way to get the job done significantly better, product iteration after product iteration. We did this when we helped Kroll OnTrack into the electronic evidence discovery market. We found all the unmet needs. There were about 65 out of 100 plus needs that we discovered. Their first iteration of the product satisfied about 25 of them. And that allowed them to enter the market very successfully. And then year after year, they just went down the list. The next year, they addressed 10 more needs. The next year, another 10. The next year, another 10. And they were always on the most efficient path to growth. Nobody could catch them because they couldn't figure out what they were doing, right? They were always creating value in the most efficient way. No one could get out in front of them. And they led that industry for years, and they're still a top player. Cordis is another great example. This is one of my first projects coming out of IBM, where instead of focusing on angioplasty balloons and how to make them better, we studied the job of restoring blood flow to an artery. And following the process, we discovered about 15 unmet needs. We determined that about 3 of them were already addressed pretty well by their current products. So the marketing team repositioned their products around those 3 unmet needs, and that led them to about a 3% gain in market share. But the real story follows that. In a year and a half later, they introduced 19 new products, all of which became number 1 or 2 in the marketplace, increasing their share to over 20%. Again, because they guessed it right, but they weren't guessing, right? They've had features in their products that address the top 10 or 15 unmet needs in the marketplace. They also discovered one outcome that was off the chart, a big opportunity score, and that was to minimize the likelihood of restenosis, which is the recurrence of the blockage in the artery. And they said that, we're working on a device that could potentially do that. And we said, well, you should triple down your efforts on that device and get it out before anyone else does. And they did. And that product, the heart stent, became $1 billion product in less than 2 years. It was one of the fastest growing medical devices in history. And those are the kind of insights that come from this process and some of the results that you get when you're not guessing. Now, there's one other key element of the process that I find extremely important and remarkable, quite honestly. And that is the fact that people don't agree on which needs are unmet. This goes back to marketing 101. You always hear this, right? There's always segments of people with different unmet needs. And you know what? It's true. We've done this over 1,000 studies. We always find groups of people with different unmet needs. And so we end up using the segmentation to drive our strategy. And so we'll find one segment that is underserved along this dimension. They want this product. Or if we're trying to find a market entry point, and we want to find people that are underserved in a way that you can address their unmet needs and find a way into the market. Now, what's interesting about segmentation is that most segmentation schemes are proxies for segments with unmet needs. Companies have just become used to segmenting markets around demographics and psychographics, around personas, around use cases, but they're assuming that these schemes they come up with show groups of people with different unmet needs. It's rarely the case that they do. They're just guessing at it. And there's a much more efficient way to do this as well, and that is to actually segment the group of people, the market, around unmet needs. Now, most companies struggle to do this because they don't agree on what a need is. They don't agree on what the needs are. They don't agree on what needs are unmet. And as a result, they can't segment around unmet needs. So they end up using these proxies for segments, which are often phantom segments and lead them down bad paths and wrong directions. All this is fixable, using the approach in the way we're describing here. So this is how it works. So quite simple. Let's assume that a third of your customer population thinks outcomes 10, 20, and 30 are really important and unsatisfied. And then another third of the population thinks that outcomes 40, 50, and 60 are really important and unsatisfied. And then another third thinks that another set of outcomes are really important and unsatisfied. Well, they're telling you that, so we can just quite simply put people in those segments based on the way they're answering the questions. So this is done mathematically through factor analysis and cluster analysis, which are tools that have been around for 50 years more. And what we end up with is the segments that are groups of people with different unmet needs. Now, at this point, we don't know why they have these different needs. We just know that there are quite literally groups of people with different unmet needs. And then we profile after the fact, right? So it's not as if we have a classification scheme up front, like age group, and we start just putting people in age group. There is no classification scheme up front, right? We're just going to segment around unmet needs, and then they go into buckets, and then we can look at each segment and then profile that segment based on all the other questions in the questionnaire to see what makes them different. Why do they stick together? What unique circumstances are they facing that's causing them to have unmet needs? So the benefits of doing this, of course, is phantom segments are replaced with hidden segments of opportunity. And the reason I say it like that is they're hidden from view. When you're segmenting using traditional segmentation methods, you'll never find them, right? You can only find segments of people with different unmet needs if you segment around unmet needs. It's just quite that simple. And so this replaces needs-based personas with, or those demographic-based personas with needs-based personas that are valid. They're authentic. They're describing authentic, real segments that exist in the marketplace. And so these fake targets are replaced with real targets, precise targets. And this is how we help a lot of companies enter new markets and win at new market entry, because they can find the hole. They can see an entryway into the marketplace that nobody's been able to see before. And we've, like I said, done this hundreds of times. And oddly enough, in every market, even the most commodity-like markets, there are always segments of people with different unmet needs. One of the stories I like telling is with Bosch, who came to us to help them enter the North American circular saw market, and they were already in the market with Skill brand for do-it-yourselfers, but they wanted to be in the commercial market with their premium brand Bosch. So they wanted to enter the market in a way that would help them beat DeWalt, beat Makita. And what that meant is the only way that would happen is if there was a segment of the population that was underserved. And so what we did is we applied our approach. We found a segment that was underserved. It was about a third of the market. They had about 14 unmet needs. They went through the list. The interesting thing here was once they knew what those 14 unmet needs were, it took them about 3 hours to conceptualize the CS20 circular saw. And as they said, it's not as if we hadn't had these ideas before, because we had, but the problem is we've had thousands of ideas before. And we have our 10,000 idea database sitting over here, and we just didn't know what combination of features to pull together to really make a difference. And this is what we often see, right? The chances of success improve dramatically when you know what the target is, right? What are the chances that the Bosch team, your team, any team, would just randomly come up with a solution that addresses these top 10 unmet needs if they didn't know those were the top 10 unmet needs, right? Very slim. But if you know what all the top 10 unmet needs are in priority order, what are the chances of addressing them? Far greater, right? And if you can address all of them, then you can make headway and compete with the top competitors in the market because you're getting the job done significantly better. The interesting thing here too is they had to get the job done better, but at the same price point. So once we had this information, we went to the engineers and said, your goal for today is to figure out how to satisfy all these unmet needs without adding costs to the product. And one of the interesting things, they had outcomes here: minimize the likelihood, minimize the cost of repairs due to cut cords, minimize the likelihood of snagging the cord on the material. What they did is they removed the cord from the circular saw and came up with a direct connect system where you could connect a extension cord into the system in such a way and tie it in such a way that it couldn't come undone. So it was very secure. So it helped satisfy three outcomes, but more importantly, it took $3.50 off the cost of the product, which they then could use the $3.50 to come up with the other set of features that went into the product. Just a great story. In each case, you're better off with information, right? So how do you fix innovation? Well, you use this approach. We call it the outcome-driven innovation process. Very specific, but very simple in what we're trying to accomplish here. What are we trying to do? We're trying to define the market, right? But we don't define a market as a product. We're going to define a market as a group of people getting a job done. Then we define the needs, but we don't define them as exciters and delighters and pains and gains and latent needs and solutions and requirements and specifications and so on, right? They're the metrics people use to measure success with getting the job done. And then we look for opportunities. Opportunities are unmet needs, needs that are underserved, needs that are overserved. We can quantify them so we're not guessing at them, debating where the opportunities are in the market. And then, of course, we want to find if there's segments of people with different unmet needs. But we're not going to segment around demographics and psychographics. We're going to segment around unmet needs because we have them, right? Now, with that information, you become much more efficient at everything you do downstream. You can build out your innovation strategy. You can build out your product strategy. You can get on the most efficient path to growth. And this is the way I really like thinking about it. I love the slide here. It's a fairly new addition. But the concept is simple. The most efficient path to growth means that you're always focusing on the set of outcomes, the smallest set of outcomes that's going to give you the greatest positive impact on the largest customer population. So what that means is you're looking for highly underserved needs that span big swaths of the population. So when we do our work, we'll segment our markets. Let's say there's 3 segments. You can see different outcomes labeled here. You can see the opportunity scores above 10, which means they're big opportunities in every segment. And this is what we look for first. We call these the high leverage opportunities. Are there any outcomes that are unmet across 100% of the population? If so, that's a gift, right? Because you can just focus on these 3 outcomes and improve satisfaction levels in the eyes of 100% of your market, right? Then you can move on to the next, these cross-segment opportunities where the unmet needs across 2 of the segments, so not all of the segments. And again, you can start working your way through the list and quite systematically figure out the most efficient path to growth. That's the goal, right? So you can identify the 30 top opportunities here and then start taking action on them. How do we do that? Like the quarter story. Let's better position the products we already have. We could satisfy 3 needs that way. Let's improve our existing products, like those angioplasty balloon products, to address 10 more unmet needs. Let's go invent the stent to satisfy a set of needs. Let's invent or invest, I should say, in R&D and M&A investments that will produce fruits further down the road, all in our effort to get the job done perfectly, right? So the way I like thinking about it, like on the last slide, this is all the opportunities. This is the most efficient path to growth, I should say, in problem space, right? And then you want to figure out the most efficient path to growth in solution space. Okay? And this won't change over time. Those 30 unmet needs are going to be unmet until somebody does something about them, right? And this is why you see evolution in many industries takes so long, right? You look at the music industry, from LPs to CDs to MP3s to streaming services, relatively quick. I mean, I lived through all that, but I mean, it's still 30, 40-year evolution before it all happens. But it's all focused on the same job of listening to music, because it eventually just addressed all the outcomes to a greater degree. I also wanted to include this in the discussion just briefly, because this is an example of a company who used ODI at scale, meaning they not only applied ODI to their products, but they applied the concepts to their internal business processes, the development process, their go-to-market strategy. Same concepts, right? It's a group of people trying to get a job done. What I focus on in most of this here is the job executor who's trying to get the core job done with the product. But there's also situations where you may want to consider suppliers and what their needs are, or regulators, or payers, or the manufacturing team, or so on, right? So there's other customers that could exist in the market ecosystem that you may want to consider, but they're all groups of people trying to get a job done. And so the same logic and thinking can be applied in such a way that you can innovate using the same set of tools across the organization. So how do you get started? So I wanted to leave you with this, and we'll send out the canvas here in a second. But it's always fun to start by taking that first step and defining the market you're already in through a job to be done lens. Now, this sounds like an easy exercise, and I'll just say up front, it's probably not an easy exercise, right? I've seen this in some markets, it might be simple, but in many cases, it's not. So it is a transition. And so let me describe this briefly. So we're going to define a market, again, as a group of people and the job to be done. So like parents trying to pass on life lessons to children would be a market. And we define the job in a very specific way, has a structure, format, much like the outcome statement has a structure and format. Here, though, it's a statement that starts with a verb, has an object of the verb, and a contextual clarifier. And again, we state it in this fashion because it's stated as a process that can be broken down. It's something that people are trying to accomplish. It doesn't say how they're doing anything. It's solution independent, so it follows many of those same rules as the outcome statements, but we're laying out the job statement. Now, what we're trying to do here is establish a stable focal point for long-term value creation. So we want to define the market in a way that it's going to be stable over time and start helping you allow to apply some of these ideas to your market. So what we're going to do is try to take you from a market defined through a product lens to a market defined through a jobs to be done lens. Because I'm assuming it's going to be easy for you to define your market through a product lens, because we're going to ask you to state, well, what is the product that you sell, and then go through the exercise. So we created a canvas to do this. We did this in conjunction with Steve Blank back in November of last year, and Steve introduced it along with us in his blog post back in November. It's a fillable document, but what we do with this is we start with the product. So start with the traditional market definition. It's a product. And then what we're going to do is we're going to ask who's using that product to get the job done. And what we're trying to do here is figure out, well, who's the job executor, right? So we list out all the groups of people that might be getting the job done. And then we want to abstract that job executor up to some overarching term that can be used to classify all the categories of people using the product to get a job done. So that's going to be your group of people that you're focused on. And you want to define your market very broadly up front. There's no reason to segment early on, right? Define everyone who's trying to get the job done. I'll give you an example here in a minute. Then on the other side of the equation, you say, well, okay, let's look at your product and ask the question, what job does the product get done, right? Now, what's interesting though is where we're going to go with this is what job is the customer trying to get done? That's the job. That's what we're going to ask here. But up here, we're going to start by saying your product does something. What is it doing? What function does it perform, right? So you can lay out the function of your product and then ask the question, what other products do your customers use in conjunction with your products? Now, the reason that that's a good question is most products only get part of a job done. And customers are often cobbling together multiple solutions to get the entire job done. And by understanding what those other solutions are, we can look at the other functions that they're getting from those products and start thinking through this higher level abstracted job statement of everything they're trying to get done. And in the end, you'll have the group of people and the job that they're trying to get done. So let me give you a quick example. Back to Bosch. So this was the circular saw example, right? So you could say they're in the circular saw market. And many people would say, that's fine. They know what that is. It's a market for circular saws, right? But we're not going to let it go with that. We're going to ask the question, so who's using the product, right? Who are the job executors? Well, it's used by roofers and framers and finish carpenters and electricians, plumbers, general contractors, lots of people, right? All these different people using a circular saw. Well, the next question is there a way to classify them in a manner that would be all-encompassing? And we thought of terms like trade workers, tradesmen, tradespeople as a grouping. And notice this is not a job description, right? It's not a role in an organization. It's just a term that's used to describe everyone that fits into the market. So we can call tradespeople a high-level category that describes their job executor. Then we can come to the other side of the equation and ask the question, well, what job does the saw get done? Well, it cuts plywood, it cuts 2x4s, it cuts lumber, right? Well, what other products do people use in conjunction with a circular saw? Well, they may use a pencil to mark the cut path. They may use a T-square to make sure the cut is straight. They may use a measuring tape to plan the cut. They may use sandpaper to finish off the burrs, right? There's a bunch of products that they might use in conjunction with that. In essence, what are they trying to do then? Are they trying to cut plywood? Are they trying to cut 2x4s? What statement would work in every situation? Cut wood along a path, cut wood in a straight line, and that's what they went with. Cut a piece of wood in a straight line. Right. I know this is a very simple example in contrast to many of the markets that you might be in, but you get the general idea of how this works, right? What we're trying to do is to move your thinking from product space to problem space. And then, of course, once you know what the market is, the group of people and the job to be done, you can apply the ODI process just like I described, right? So there you have it, the group of people getting a job done, and you're ready to go. Now with that, let's go back to the book. If you want to know more about this or take a class on this as well, we have our Jobs to be Done plus ODI Introduction to Fundamentals certification course. We have a cohort that starts on September 5th, right around the corner. So if you're interested in going in depth with us on the pieces of the process, that would be a good learning opportunity.
Sounds great, Tony. Thank you so much for a great talk.